Most of us have probably heard Bruce Springsteen's song, Glory Days, and for those of us who haven't, the theme is pretty simple. The best years of our lives, they pass us by quickly, and soon enough, we're just left with boring stories of glory days. And I'll suggest that to some extent this is a universal human experience, right? Many of us can probably remember a time in our lives where we really seemed to be on top of the world, we had it all together, and now that time's over. And all we have is the memory of it. All we can do is remember those days. And I think there's something to be said for that. If we remember where we were when we were at our best, that can give us motivation here and now to try and live our lives well, or remind us of what worked for us at one time and what might still be crucial to our well-being now. But on the other hand, we can fall into what I'm going to call the Springsteen snare, but what most of us probably just call unhealthy nostalgia, where we get so caught up in what we think of as the glory days that we miss out on the life that's happening here and now before our eyes. Think of the dad who's too busy shining his high school trophy to actually go outside and play with his kids. And compare that guy to the dad who uses his experience playing ball in high school to actually go outside and teach his kids the game. One of these guys is going to have a much better, much happier life, and in some sense still be living his glory days, while the other one just has a trophy and a memory. And we can fall into this trap in our spiritual lives too. We can look back at the mighty works of God in the Bible. We can look at the Holy Fathers assembled at the great ecumenical councils. We can look at bygone years in our churches where we needed 5 divine liturgies on a Sunday for sheer number of people, and those 5 were standing room only. And we can think of those as the glory days that not only passed us by, but the glory days that in the case of at least my generation never reached us at all. And on the one hand, maybe we don't care. Maybe we're just here for the nostalgia because it reminds us of happier times with mom and dad or baba and diro. Or maybe we're here because we read some things on the internet that make us feel like we're more aligned with historical Christianity if we're here as opposed to or somewhere else. Not bad reasons per se, but if they're the only thing that's getting us here, then we've got problems, because our pious and God-fearing ancestors in the faith didn't starve themselves to build our churches so that we could turn them into beautiful museums where we reminisce about half-remembered glory days. Such an attitude would run counter to the very faith that they intended to pass down to us. So we heard just now in the letter to the Hebrews that even while the saints of the Old Testament were conquering kingdoms, doing what's just, receiving the promises, putting foreign armies to flight, receiving back their dead through resurrection, all of those things, God had foreseen something better concerning us, to the point that without us, these saints were not made perfect. There was something incomplete for them. And in the first place, this refers to our share in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, which fulfills all the promises of God in the Old Testament and begins the life of the church in the New. Through our share in Jesus Christ, we are promised, and in some sense, through the sacramental life of the church, we already receive a heavenly life and kingdom better and more glorious than anything the Old Testament kings could even dream of. And this isn't something that just stays in the past, because Jesus Christ has promised to remain with us to the close of the age. We encounter him in our prayer, in his word, in the sacraments, especially in communion with his body and blood in the Eucharist. We encounter him in the voice of his church, which St. Paul tells us is the body of Christ on earth. In all these things, Jesus Christ is really and truly present to us, fulfilling his plan, which includes us. On this day, we celebrate in a special way the continued presence of Christ in his church with the restoration of the holy icons in 843, the triumph of orthodoxy, the triumph of right worship, the triumph of right belief. Fun fact, the Second Ecumenical Council of Nicaea in 787 had already confirmed that the making of icons was in line with the teaching of the apostles because it's based on the fact that the once invisible God became visible in Jesus Christ. But partly due to a culture that would have made it convenient to not have visible depictions of Christ or the saints, partly due to that, it was an uphill battle for 60 years until the true faith won out. I would suggest there's a striking similarity to the fact that in our day, we're 60 years out from the Second Vatican Council, which taught such things as the Bible's freedom from error, the unchangeability of the faith of the Church, the call of all people to salvation and holiness in Jesus Christ, the sinfulness of things like contraception, the arms race, etc., 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 and the importance of the reverent celebration of the liturgy. The Second Vatican Council taught all these things and was promptly ignored, misrepresented, or openly contradicted throughout the world. And throughout the Church, in the past 60 years, I don't think we can deny that we've seen the consequences, the sterility spawned by rejection of these teachings. But at the same time, we've seen the fertility of the parts of the Church that have received these teachings. We can look across the river. And I think that given that we've seen the results in our own day of hearing the voice of God through the Church, I think the question is for us, brothers and sisters, what are we going to do? Are we going to attempt to confine God to the glory days of bygone years? Or are we going to accept that His plan includes us, here and now, and that He still speaks to us in the life of the Church?